What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Contesting the Point. Malik here, and I pray that everyone is remaining safe and healthy during these difficult times. But guys, we're coming fresh off the first online CDL event, and who better to talk about the madness with than the world-class duo of MerK and Maven, back on the show once again. How you guys feeling?
I'm feeling great. I love that. World class. Yeah, we had our moments though this weekend. There was a time where Joe had to step away from the camera because we were laughing so hard we both lost tears. We were casting until midnight the one night, and our sanity was dwindling. But I think overall, man, it wasn't perfect, but we're happy to be back. It's incredible to have the CDL back. It was a tough, month-long or so break. It's exciting to get back into the Call of Duty esports action.
Yeah, no, I mean, Clinton sort of took that one for me. But yeah, just good to be back. Had a great weekend. Surprising weekend. Florida was able to win it, but now I'm excited to get into this show.
Yeah, man, definitely good to have you guys back again, man. You guys have been on the show more than anybody, I think. So
we absolutely have.
It's our fourth duel.
Oh yeah. This one's going to be good, guys. All right, so I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the rules, but here's a little refresher for anyone else. I'm going to present a headline from the CDL. I'm going to give a hot take on the story. One of these guys will defend the hot take while the other attacks it. I'll award points for convincing arguments, and after 3 stories, whoever has the most points wins 60 seconds to pop off in our Astro Listen Up moment. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Sounds great.
All right, on to our first story of the day. One of the biggest surprises to come out of the Dallas home series was the Florida Mutineers winning it all. After dropping the first map to Toronto, it was looking pretty grim, but then they went on to plow through Chicago and Minnesota without their star player Pristini. Crazy. Now, last week on the show, Momo defended this, and I gave him an L for the round. Turns out he was right, and Florida looked pretty great. So I'm admitting I was wrong. Props to you, Phil. You're the expert. I saw you popping off on Twitter about it, but I have been convinced. And with that, my hot take is that with this win, Florida is a top 4 team. MerK, I'm going to leave it to you to convince me otherwise on the attack. Am I overestimating the squad right now?
When we talk about top 4 teams, I think the top 3, right, it's Atlanta, Chicago, and Dallas. They all have an event win under their belt. Florida, they were able to pick that up this weekend, but there's just one team missing from this conversation, and I feel like, maybe if they don't lose that grand final, then we aren't having this, but I am going to defend Minnesota. I believe the Minnesota ROKKR are a top 4 team. We saw it the last 2 events. They were able, to beat Atlanta FaZe. Every single placing that Minnesota has puts them in that top 4 discussion. The only thing they don't have is a W. So I think when you look at their yearly results, they are better than Florida's. You look at some of the teams that they have beat, I think they have such a strong resume, and they have an MVP caliber player on their team in Godorex. He has just been so darn good for these guys. For me, Minnesota is still in that top 4 conversation.
I agree. I have to ask you though, MerK, if we put Minnesota in that top 4 and take out another team, say Chicago, a team that lost twice to Florida, would that still be a viable top 4 with Chicago out and Florida in?
I just don't think so, because the only team that Chicago has lost to has been Florida. They've been so good throughout the rest of the year, and I just think it's a talent thing. It's a consistency thing. Maybe right now you can have that argument for Florida, but I just don't know from, 2-3 months from now if we're still going to be having this discussion. For me, it's Minnesota. Just from what we've seen, they're a top 4 team. I think Chicago will be there. I think Atlanta will be there. I think Dallas will be there. That's why those are my top 4. It's a talent. It's an overall roster note. That's why those teams are there for me.
All right. Well, Maven, I'm going to let you weigh in on this, man. Florida, not a top 4 team. What do you think?
This was the only conversation really coming into this event. The top 3 were kind of solidified. It was who was that 4th spot. And I think coming into this event, we all finally were convinced it was ROKKR based on the win against FaZe at the previous tournament. We finally kind of had it locked in. ROKKR are the number 4 team. Now, I would agree with you, Joe. I believe if Florida didn't have to go through them to get this win, like if ROKKR had maybe lost a little bit earlier, Florida to get the win, I think there's more of a debate. But the fact that they beat them to do it is what goes on to solidify it for me. Because you think about it, ROKKR has 2 second-place finishes. Florida have a second-place finish, and now they have that win. If you think about convincing wins, for ROKKR, you beat FaZe once. You have 2 wins over Huntsman if you're Florida. I just don't see how you can break it down and not say Florida are your top 4 team. Now, do I think it's very close between them and ROKKR? Yeah, I do without question. They're the only 2 teams in the conversation for that spot. But how do you do it? Florida have an event win, ROKKR don't. Florida beat Rocker in the grand final. There's just no debate here for me. This might not last more than a couple of weeks. This could be a constantly fluctuating thing, but I saw enough that I'm convinced Florida, they're in the top 4.
Yeah, again, I think the big thing for me is just we look throughout the entire year. And that's where the difference is you do have an event where the Florida Mutineers, they don't get top 4 in Los Angeles. They didn't make it to the semifinal. So I think that's the big thing, the key thing for me. I understand they have that win, but the fact is Minnesota Rocker, they have gotten out of their group every single time they had to, and they're able to get to a second grand final. This is back-to-back finals. That is top 2 back-to-back finals that they were able to get to.
That's impressive.
So yeah, it's very impressive. And I also think you look at the Minnesota Rocker and what they're able to do, right? They lose to Dallas. You look at this event, they're able to beat Dallas. This is the first time they played Florida. You and I casted that grand final. I didn't agree with their vetoes. I didn't like the maps they played Florida on. They're a team where they learn from their mistakes. And I just feel like when these two teams match up again, Minnesota's going to take them down.
They could, but like for Florida too, you got to think about the fact that, yeah, you're talking about the whole year, but Florida also recently had a change, right? Like they just had Fero come in, and Fero puts on an ungodly type performance, like a 1.24 KD. Like he was a beast. He was probably the best flex there this weekend. So I'm not convinced we've seen the best from Florida. And the other piece of this too, unfortunately, with everything going on, we've switched over to this online format. So yeah, maybe things will be a little bit different. There's going to be an outlier, probably positive or negative, maybe in the mix here. Florida looked very, very comfortable playing from home. And with all that young talent, man, with Havoc seeming to peak at the right time, Skies, we know how good he is. Rocker, I guess, I don't know. I might have convinced myself that I think Florida have a higher peak with the talent on that team. Like they might get better and better. So I mean, we're gonna have to wait and see a couple months from now. But for me right now, Florida without question, top 4.
Yeah. You know what? Maybe you bringing up Fero. We're going to talk a little bit more about him later. But man, that was MVP caliber performance definitely that he put down this week. The lineup's looking a lot better. That said, them dropping that match to Toronto at the top of the tournament, it kind of looked like how I expected Florida to be. And I know they ended up winning the event, but I still think that there are some soft spots that they need to iron out before we.
You could say that for everybody, though. I mean, yeah, FaZe has had a disappointing loss. Huntsman have had a disappointing loss. I think it plays to the format that we currently have, like, and to the talent we have in this league. Like, anyone can beat anyone at any given time, and I think that's what's truly special about it. Was I worried when they lost the first series? What was it, to London, the tournament they got to a grand final, they got smoked? Yes. Was I worried when they lost to Toronto in the first round? Yes, I was. But it's not where you start, it's how you finish. So they got the win. It's a win. Good point.
All right, well, Florida, a top 4 team. Man, this round was actually really close. I had you guys knotted up, but Maven, for that last counter, I'm gonna go ahead and give this round to you. 8-7 is our count after round 1. Florida top 4 team, they're certainly looking like it right now, especially with them winning that last event. And like you said, Maven, I kind of feel like the online atmosphere, they're a little more comfortable in that than the other teams. At least it seems so. But
yeah,
time will tell as we move forward. So
people can talk about latency and servers and all this stuff, but a bigger piece of this is just the mental aspect for me. Like, who is going to be comfortable playing from home, putting excuses to bed and playing well? And so far, Florida doing it.
That was a tough one because they just beat them. So I was doing my best.
You did a hell of a job.
The fact that Florida just beat Minnesota.
Moving on to topic number 2, we're going to stay with the Florida Mutineers. And how could we not talk about Fero? He had a great performance this weekend. The guy was pretty rough back during the LA home series a few weeks ago. But apparently during his time off, he's been grinding hard because we saw some extremely formidable gameplay from Fero at the Dallas homestand. So guys, I have to ask you, my hot take for this. Fero was the MVP for the Dallas event. What do you guys think? MerK, you attacked last time, so I'm going to let you defend this time. Maven, what do you think, man? Can you disprove Fero being the MVP of the Dallas?
I think I could. I mean, I have a million positive things I could say about Fero. I'll leave those for Joe and just talk about some keys for me from other players on the team. Skies was phenomenal. I'm going to keep it simple for him. He had the highest overall KD at the event with a 1.30. He had the highest plus minus at 101 kills. Statistically, he was probably the best player there, but he was playing the main AR, obviously. My main point is actually going to be Havoc. And I know it's a little bit unconventional, as a lot of our MVPs in the conversation have been our ARs because they've been kind of the stat phenoms or your flex because they're pulling out an AR from time to time. But let's think about what Havoc has done, because you remove your veteran, your world champion, and Pristini, right? Like, you take that out. And I think even with him in there was probably some questions about leadership with this squad. It's a lot of young guys, a lot of new players, or players that haven't ever been sort of that, maybe in-game or vocal leader, or out of game as well. We got to go to elicit him, and Joe and I were so impressed with what we heard from Havoc.
Pinch, shot.
In hell, guys.
Nice.
Damage, in my tongue.
Nice, push up front.
Havoc was the guy leading the troops. Now, was their small talk great? But when you were talking about when to pinch, when to hold, when to push, it was all coming from Havoc. He was soft-spoken, but when they had to make a play, he was the one calling it. I found that so impressive. And then let's get back to the whole route man gets paid for my boy Havoc. How many times, Joe, when we were commentating him or the team, where he made this key rotation? You could think about it against Ultra on Hackney Yard, but he gets the big sneaky rotation to Docks to get the win. On the cave rotation against Huntsman and Rocker. I mean, he had so many moments where he made the heads up play to get a rotation that won the map for his team. And it's not a player that I would expect it from, and that's what was so impressive for me, and a reason that I think he should be in the MVP talk, if not the MVP. And then if you want to talk stats, this year has been all about the AR, which I've said early from a stat standpoint, but Havoc put up a 1.04. That was the second highest SMG KD overall of the weekend outside of Bance, who had a 1.05, just 0.01 higher than him. So he did it with the stats, he did it with the comms, he did it with the routes. Route man gets paid. Havoc's my MVP for Florida.
Okay, convincing argument. Havoc definitely looked bananas this entire weekend. MerK, man, what do you got to say about that, man? Defend Fero on this one.
All right, listen, I was very impressed with what Clint was talking about with Havoc as well, right? As he said, someone needed to step up. But Maven, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
When we saw this Florida team put together, the addition of Fero, what did you think they were going to be successful in? Which game mode did you think they were going to be number one in?
Well,
what was going to be
the
their
thing I thought would improve
best
the most
game
would probably be slaying power, because he's so good, and then probably S&D, because he's known as like the S&D phenom. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not really where they showed improvement. Where did they show improvement? In Respawn. And I am going to read you some ridiculous stats from this weekend. Most domination kills, Fero at 135. Most domination kills per game, 27. Most overall kills for the entire event, Fero, 477. Most hardpoint kills through the entire event, Fero, 305. This guy led the Respawn categories from top to bottom. And yes, we touched on main ARs. They've been leading the way. He had a 1.24 overall in a flex position, a 1.38 in the finals. The finals where they had to absolutely destroy Minnesota after that first map, and it was due to Fero. This guy has brought a new mentality to this team. We heard Mox talk about it in a post-game interview. He is fired up. He has this team fired up. And by the way, he is leading the way for them in respawns. The man is doing it all.
The numbers don't lie, and I like the fact that you guys
don't lie.
You guys are backing this up with a lot of statistics. But I would say that I was interested to know how Fero was going to be a leader, or what type of role he would play from a vocal standpoint on his team. MerK, do you have any context you can add to Fero as far as that goes?
I mean, I don't think he was necessarily added to this team for his communication. I mean, when you listen to listen-ins, again, you're going to hear his comms, but he was brought to this team to solidify himself as a star, and that's exactly what he did. They needed help in the slaying power route. You heard Maven just say that. What did he think they were going to help? Search and destroy, slaying power. He stepped it up in slaying. They're still a very new team. I think they're going to improve in their search and destroy the more that this squad is together, and that's what's scary about the Florida Mutineers. Is I don't even think we've seen the peak of Fero and Florida on this team.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I agree with all of that. Fero was a monster. He's been an MVP previously with Team Caliber, all the way back to the Call of Duty World War II Stage 2 Finals, I believe. And we know he's capable of it, but this kind of goes back to when you and I had to argue about the MVP for Dallas when they won, and I kind of wanted to look past the stats, and I picked who, because with him taking on that smoke trophy role and playing more around the objective, it enabled Shotzzy to be a better player and have his best tournament. And I kind of think Havoc is doing that in a similar way here for Fero. The fact that he's taken over the leadership roles, the big rotations, and allowed Fero to just slay out on the map. You listen to the comps, he's not the chattiest player. Fero was not too talkative. He was just flying around and frying, which is great, and you need that, but there's a give and take. You need what Havoc was doing as well. He was making the heads-up plays. He was the one leading the troops in the key moments. And I guess right now, considering how young this team is and that they're filled to the brim with talent with a player like Skies, for me, what Havoc was doing was more important to them winning this tournament this weekend.
So the only thing I will say to your Dallas Empire argument is that we were looking at that, and the reason I think we had that discussion is because stats-wise, it was different than what we saw the rest of the year. Right? It was just different the way Dallas won. But the highest they had was like a 1.08, which we haven't seen.
Sure,
because
we can't
of their teamwork. So it was really hard to make the argument for Clayster, because what have we seen from Manayars? What did Skies do this weekend? Like a 1.3. That's what was normal. Fero is doing this as a flex. And again, he is literally leading them in the respawns against the best teams in the world. They took down Chicago and everybody was like, what just happened? You would not expect this Florida team to consistently beat teams like that in respawn. And he's one of the main reasons, if not the reason they're doing it. And to your point about Havoc, yes, he's making those routes, but he has help as well. Mox is another player who will make those routes and make those calls.
I know, but you got to do this in context, because you have that whole spiel about stats. And yes, he has the most stats, but he's doing it for a position. We've seen that before with a player like Celium or an AR when they have the M4 in their hands. Havoc, I know the stats are much lower, but you can't compare it to the flex they are. You have to compare it to the SMGs across the board, and he was number 2 over the entire weekend with a 1.04. I know a 1.04 doesn't look as flashy as a 1.24, but from that position, would you agree it's equally impressive?
No, I would. I would say it was a great event for Havoc, but I just think that if you're asking the Florida Mutineers to beat teams like Chicago and Minnesota, you need your stars to slay.
But you say that, but when you take a look at Chicago, why did they lose, Joe? Did they lose because of stats and their slaying power? No, they lost because they couldn't rotate on the goddamn map. That's why they lost, because they weren't playing the game correctly. Havoc was the one making those plays against the team like Huntsman to get the rotation, make sure they had spawns and get the win. So, I don't know, there's the stats, there's the heads-up plays, but I mean, you need both, right? You need Fero, you need Havoc.
They both are great. One thing I do want to say that's kind of weighing into my decision here, who I'm going to give this round to, is the fact that Fero had a lot of pressure on him coming into this event, filling the shoes of Pristini. I think for him to be able to perform the way that he did, you know, especially given his performance in LA, to come back and to be so dominant throughout the entire weekend, to me, there's something that speaks to me about that. And I feel like, you know, you can look at the stats and we can talk about Havoc and the role that he plays on the team, but man, Fero has come in and he's really lit a fire under everyone else's behind. So with that being said, I'm going to give this round to MerK. I believe you valiantly defended Fero there. And
it was nuts.
This was a close one, because I really do feel like Havoc is you know, somebody who definitely you could put up there as well. But with that being said, this is another close round. It was 8 MerK, 7 Maven, which puts our score right now for the game at 15 apiece. We are all tied up going into the final round. All right, so for our last topic of the day, we're taking a look at a team that's a little less spoken about, the Seattle Surge. Unfortunately, one of the recurring storylines of the CDL for this team is that they're failing to make it out of group stage. We've seen them at 3 of 4 tournaments already, and they failed to make the bracket every time. So I think it's been, 8 games that they've played, and they've only won 2, both versus the Gorillas. That being said, I still think there's hope for them. I want to throw them a little bit of bell. My hot take for the Seattle Surge is that they're going to finish in the top half of the standings when the season is completely over. I think we got MerK on the attack on this one. What do you think, MerK?
All right, so you're saying top half of the standings, right?
Yes.
That's the take. Okay, so that is top 6. Okay.
Yeah.
They are not probably going to catch Atlanta, Minnesota, Chicago, Florida, and Dallas, correct? Those are your top 5 teams right now, and most of those teams have an event win under their belt. Minnesota keeps placing top 4 consistently. I do not see Seattle catching them with the way that those teams are playing right now. So that opens up the 6th spot. That is the only spot that these guys could potentially fight for in my mind. But who has that right now? I look at 3 teams, London, Paris, and Optic Gaming. Because we just saw in Los Angeles that Optic Gaming has continued to improve. Who knows what's going on over there? I'm still a little bit worried about Optic. But I do not think that the Seattle Surge right now are better than London or the Paris Legion. Plus the fact that we haven't seen New York in their roster change. I've heard some good things about them. So for me, I just do not think the Seattle Surge have what it takes. I just think there's way too many teams that are better than them. Yes, maybe they have had a tough schedule, but that's what every team has to deal with, right? Like, you have to be able to beat one of those top half of those teams. They just haven't been able to do it. The only thing they've been able to do is beat the Los Angeles Guerrillas, and, well, based on what we saw last weekend, that's not very good.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I mean, they did play some of those top teams pretty close, like the Minnesota Rocker, for instance. They took them to the last game. So I feel like they still play these top teams strong. It's only a matter of time before they break through, and they can.
That's what we keep saying, but guess what Game 5 is Search and Destroy, and they have not improved in Search and Destroy one bit, and that's just why I'm worried. You see these guys, they are just not in a good spot. I feel like maybe they need another roster change as well, because right now, the Seattle Surge, they are doing the opposite of surging.
Okay, all right. Well, what do you have to say about this, Maven? Is there any hope for the Seattle Surge to finish in the top half of the standings?
Yeah, there's absolutely hope. I mean, it's hard because there's so many teams. We're talking about one out of the other, 7 that are going to fight for that 6th spot. But this is why I find myself kind of believing in them, because, like you said, they're pushing teams the distance. They've been playing people tough. We know how many Game 5s they've gone to. And I think it's less about gameplay. I really, really think it's less about gameplay. These guys have got to get out of their own heads. I mean, since the beginning, there has been something in every event that one of these guys is whining about, whether it's the format of the tournament, how long they have to wait to play on a certain day, the spawns on a game, the fact that it's now online. There are so many excuses coming out of this team. If they could instead of looking at every single other element of this entire thing, focus on just improving themselves, I think it would work miracles for this team. It was sort of what I talked about with Optic early in the year. They need to stop making excuses, stop complaining about the game and everything around it, and just focus on improving. If they can somehow change that mentality, I think they have a really good shot to get into the 6th place. Because Damon finally tweeted something last night that I liked when he just said, if we could win S&D, imagine where we'd be. Like, yes, you'd be getting to grand finals if suddenly your S&D was better. They're 3-12 in S&D right now. It's horrific. But do I think with those players on that squad that they can improve and Search and Destroy? I think they absolutely can. They just have to get that at least closer to like a 50-50 type win rate, and suddenly they're knocking some of these top dogs out. So instead of all the bitching, all the whining, all the griping, they have to focus on improving, because right now they're horrific. They are one of the most disappointing teams in the history of Call of Duty esports when you take a look at the talent on that roster, but they have the potential to improve. You have veterans all over the board. You have talent all over the place. They need to just get back to the basics, focus on Search and Destroy, get better, and start performing. It's possible, but I'm just sick of all the whining. Just focus on getting better. Stop blaming everything else.
All right, so what I'm hearing from you is the talent is there, but they're not quite there yet. They're not quite playing to that level.
No, I mean, they're not playing to their talent. Yes, to a degree, it is a gameplay thing in the sense of they're not playing very well, and they're not playing to their potential, sure, but I just think it's less about improving that first and improving the mindset first. They have to improve the mindset first, because it's been pathetic. And when you're wasting, in my eyes, who could go down as one of the greatest players in the history of Call of Duty by the time it's all said and done? You're wasting a year of Octane's career. The stats he's putting up right now are ludicrous. And I know the ARs have been going nuts, but Octane has been incredible. If they can get everything else figured out and just start to focus up on improving, yes, man, they have a chance to get 6th without question.
To that, though, I do have a point. You're saying they have the talent. Maven, you and I have had this conversation,
okay,
and I'm going to call you on this. You do not believe they have enough talent on this team.
Well, I don't think they have the young talent that a lot of...
they need another superstar, and I think they do too. I think they are one superstar away from being in the top 6. I think they need a little help.
Would it help? Yes. Would it help? Yes. But do I think they need another superstar to improve and Search and Destroy? I don't, man. I really think it is mental weakness, complaining, and they just need to focus on themselves. Do I think, Joe, that this squad could be a top team in the game? No, but that's not the argument. I don't think they can be a top 4 team with this lineup. Do I think they can get in that 6th place in the top half? Do I think that is possible to be better than the likes of Paris, London? Yeah, I do. I absolutely do with this lineup.
When you and I talk about it, you've been a Optic Gaming fan. Say they're going to be better than Optic too. Come on.
I think that I'd feel, Joe. I think that I'd feel less good about arguing this if I wasn't so concerned about Optic now, because I've been a big proponent of Optic, but all the rumors with Chino subbing in, and we don't know what's going on with Dashi. I think if I felt more clear about that, I knew that core 5-man team of Optic was going to be grinding and improving upon their last tournament, I don't think I'd be arguing this. But the fact that I now have question marks all over the place for Optic Gaming again, that's why I think I can do it.
I mean, do you have question marks, or is it just rumors? I mean, you and I don't know. We'll have to see at the next tournament.
There's been a couple of rumors that around what's going on with Dashy, and I know how much him and Slasher were clashing, and one wants one out, one wanted the other out. I don't know if they've fixed things. And yes, you're right. It's been rumors, but the rumors have been enough, and I've seen comments in streams that, yeah, I'm worried, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little worried too, but I just don't think Seattle has enough to catch those teams.
Well, I think Maven makes a lot of good points about the fact that there is talent there. But what I'm really gathering from, what you guys, the experts, are saying is that pretty much Octane is Carmelo Anthony on the Denver Nuggets. He doesn't have anybody playing around him to make that team.
Well, he has the names, but the way they're playing, yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, there's no one really performing.
No, it's like LeBron's, a couple of LeBron's Cleveland's years is what it looks like.
I think it's more so as well, though, when you look at this roster. By the way, I'm sure Octane, if we're going to keep harping on them wasting his years, I'm sure Octane got to pick majority of this roster in my mind. I mean, this is his team. But yes, in terms of stats and slaying, the guys around him aren't those sort of players. The past few years, they've been role players. Obviously, they're world champions on this team, but you need somebody to step up, and I just don't know who it's going to be. That's why I look at a change.
Yes, yeah, you're right, but like their dom has been good. Their hardpoint has been okay. They've had some close losses, otherwise they'd have like a decent win right there. It's the Surge, and like I don't think the talent in the slang is a big conversation with Surge. It is more about the team pushes, the communication. It's less about the talent.
But this has been a trend for Octane slacked apathy teams most of their career. It has.
Well,
we have this conversation every single year, so. Yeah, I do think it comes down to the roster because it feels like these players consistently struggle with search and destroy.
And maybe you're right. Maybe they just can't be good at search. But I guess until they get past what I think is all these mental issues and they can come at me as much as they want, until they get past that, I'm not convinced. Now, maybe they won't get past it. Maybe they're just going to whine all year long and be a dumpster team. But I'm hoping that's not the
cash.
case.
Well, Maven, I might be with you on the not convinced boat because right now I'm not really convinced. I think MerK's changed my mind on this one. I don't think that the Seattle Surge are going to be able to finish in the top half, which basically means I'm going to give this round to MerK. And that's 5 more points for you, MerK. Maven, I'm going to give you 4 because I feel like you did go hard. But that brings our overall total to 20 for MerK.
We're tied up. Good. 2-2.
2-2 now.
MerK, you are the winner of our Astro Listen Up moment. You get 60 seconds to pop off. What do you got to say to the people, man?
60 seconds to pop off. Man, there has been a lot going on. I think Malik said it at the top of the show. I hope everybody's doing all right. But yeah, I am just seeing way too much negative energy on social media, on Reddit. The Call of Duty League has had to make such a transition. There's been so many people working their tails off to be able to bring you guys these online tournaments, and I'm just happy, man. I'm happy we got to, go through one of those tournaments again. Congrats to the Florida Mutineers, but to all you negative people out there that are complaining about so many things, oh, this doesn't count, this doesn't count, it's all baloney. People are just trying to give you guys an excellent product, and the fact that you continue to put all this negative BS out there, it's just unreal, man. In such a tough time right now for so many different people. Enjoy the Call of Duty League. I know I am. I know myself and Maven, we're so excited to cast once again this weekend, and it is only going to improve from here. Yes, do I want to be on LAN? Yes, do I want the fans going crazy? Absolutely. It's not like anyone doesn't want that. So for all you people out there that are going crazy, that are being super negative, screw you.
I don't think it could be said any better. If I could retweet actual words that were spoken, I would retweet everything that you just said there, MerK. All right, guys, and that does it for another edition of Contesting the Point. Thanks once again to our fantastic casters who joined me, MerK and Maven. And guys, we'll be back next week to break down the action leading into the Chicago home series next week. But until then, take care.